Okay, so today I'm going to be ranking the Nightmare on Elm Street films. Now, for those of you who are wondering why do this now, well, it's because about 2-3 weeks ago, I got a pack for $22 of all the Nightmare on Elm Street films, and since then, every Saturday and Sunday, I watched two a night, staying up till like 2 or 3 in the morning, finishing two Nightmare on Elm Street films, and just recently I finished all of them. Now, this pack only included the original canon, that was the first Nightmare on Elm Street film through Freddy vs. Jason, but I will be adding the remake in this countdown because I think it's a good remake. Now, coming in at the worst Nightmare on Elm Street film, and this is going to surprise a lot of people, I think that Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Masters, is the most atrocious in the franchise. Now, this film got positive reviews, got 56% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it was well received by fans, and I just can't understand that. And 3, it has the most likable characters of the franchise, of course, besides Nancy, and in the first half of this movie, they kill all of them off to make way for these pathetic, cardboard cutout, new characters that are only there to appeal to the new generation. What they did was destroy and stab the fans in the back just so they could appeal to a bunch of brats who didn't watch the franchise. I think it's the worst film in the franchise, and, well, I think it's the worst. Now, coming in at our next pick would be Nightmare on Elm Street 5. Now, from here on out, it's clear sailing, because I think everything beyond this point is a good movie, including Nightmare on Elm Street 5. It sunk into the lore that Nightmare on Elm Street 3 had started and showed more of Freddy's past with his mother and the inmates raping that created him, and I think that was a very interesting aspect. And not to mention, the effects budget was amazing, the plot was good, and I actually liked the main character, Alice. I hated her in Nightmare on Elm Street 4, but in this one she was actually likable. I thought the kills were good, and I thought it was just a good Nightmare on Elm Street film. Now, coming in at our next spot is a Nightmare on Elm Street 3, The Dream Warriors. And this is going to surprise you that it's so low on my list, but don't take that I don't like it. I really love this film. It's just that I found something to love more about the films above it. As I said, Nightmare on Elm Street and above, I love these films. So, anyhow, as I said before, Nightmare on Elm Street 3 had the most likable characters of the franchise besides Nancy, and they're very developed. The effects in this is great. The story is amazing. The acting's good. As the best in this franchise is when they dive into the myth of Freddy Krueger and explore what makes him tick. And this movie just does just that. I think it's the first movie where they do it, and that's why I like it so much. Because it started what made some of the best aspects of the franchise. Now, coming in at our next pick is Freddy's Dead. Now, a lot of people are going to hate me for this, that I put Freddy's Dead above Nightmare on Elm Street 3, but for me, that's just how it worked. I really liked how this franchise saw that it was coming to the end of its popularity, so it took the time to craft an end with no spin-off or anything in sight, and they just killed Freddy and said, this is the end of the Nightmare franchise. They didn't try and keep on going like Jason did, or make some new idea, which Michael Myers did. I love Michael Myers, but they continued it too long. And I think this franchise was very wise in doing that. I really liked the effects in it. The acting was good. The plot was okay in the beginning. There was a really, really silly and crappy death. And but towards the end, it became a phenomenal film that I really loved. And in the end, Freddy's Dead was just a great end to the franchise. But it wasn't, and you'll see why later in the list. Now, coming in at my next pick is Freddy vs. Jason. Again, people are going to hate me that this is above Dream Warriors, but this film pairs Freddy Krueger and Jason Voorhees. I love this film just for that. The effects in it are top-notch. It might be at times silly and cartoonish, but just the fact that these two icons are on screen, doing stuff together, and that Robert Englund returned to his role as Freddy Krueger make this film worth watching. Now, a lot, and I do mean a lot of people are going to hate me for this, but I put in my next spot the Nightmare on Elm Street remake. Now, a lot of people don't like this film, and I think that's bullcrap, because Rotten Tomatoes gave this 15%, and that's just unwarranted. I've seen movies that deserve half a star. This movie is easily 2.5 or 3, maybe even 4, because Jackie Earle Haley killed it as Freddy Krueger. I'm not gonna lie, he's an amazing replacement. I really hope he comes back. The effects in this movie were top-notch. The acting was really good, but the characters, I think, are what brought it down. The character of Nancy was wasted. They turned her from the relatable teenage, just normal girl who we all felt bad for, because anybody could see themselves as her. She was normal, into this outcast, dark gothic girl. I think that was a horrible decision, because now only a certain percentage of people can relate to her, and even a normal audience sees her as the cliche outcast. But overall, this film had great effects, good acting. It was a good remake, and Jackie Earle Haley killed it as Freddy Krueger. Now, coming in at my next spot is A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. Now, a lot of people kinda dislike this film for the wrong reasons. Now, I think they don't like it because it was a sequel, and it kind of destroyed the everything the first one had set up, because it made Freddy come out through somebody. Is then he got in their head, and then he came to the real world, and that just wasn't part of the original, and that a lot of people hated it for destroying the mythos of the original. But I see this movie as what it is. That is a very well done horror movie. Freddy Krueger has some great practical effects, some great lines. Of course, Robert Englund killed it. He always kills it. He is Freddy Krueger, and the story was very well done. It wasn't great, but it was It was just interesting. Now, the main character I really liked, because you really sympathized for him. Where most movies, they have a bunch of but most of the Nightmare on Elm Street films have multiple main characters who they try and get you to care for each of them individually. Well, this movie had one character who really just got screwed over on everything, and you really felt bad for him. This is one of the characters I'm going to remember throughout my life, because I cared about him more than I did in most movies I've seen. And I think what should have been done in this movie was, in it, they show Freddy Krueger coming out into the real world through this guy. I think they should have played it out where they show Freddy Krueger killing his victims, but in the end they show maybe the main character with the glove on killing someone, and then they flash to Freddy killing him, and they make the audience wonder, was Freddy really coming out, or is his myth so powerful that it influenced the kid to kill? I think it could have been better, but in the end it was just a really guilty pleasure 80s horror movie that I enjoyed the heck out of. Now, people are going to agree with my next picks to say the second best in the Nightmare on Elm Street canon is Wes Craven's New Nightmare. Now, a lot of people don't consider this Nightmare on Elm Street canon because it's more of a spin-off. But I love this film. I've seen it twice, and each time I love it, and I appreciate it that much more every time I see it. So, again, this movie is very surreal. Mostly because it takes place in our world. The Nancy, Heather Lamperkoff, I think, plays herself. Robert Englund plays himself. Even Wes Craven's in this. So, it's very real for the first maybe 20 minutes. And then they start showing the deaths of people because this ancient demon is taking the form of Freddy Krueger. It's a very clever plot that ties into the original franchise. and takes a whole new spin on things, and I'm very glad that this was made to be a standalone film. This movie was made to redeem the franchise. Critically, it was probably the best in the franchise besides the first. It was received by fans. It wasn't a smash hit at the box office, but it did okay. And this film is just a really great piece of horror. I definitely suggest you watch it because it's not only one of Wes Craven's best, but it's probably one of the best of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. Okay, coming in at my number 1 spot, and this is where things get cliche, is Nightmare on Elm Street. What I mean by cliche is, if you've noticed, my list has been a little unorthodox, putting Nightmare on Elm Street 2 and the remake so high on my list. Well, as always, Nightmare on Elm Street, the original, goes at number 1. Everybody knows it's the best in the franchise. Everybody knows it's a classic. And if you're gonna buy this film, you buy it on Blu-ray or Steelbook, because it's just such a classic. You go all out when you get it, because it makes just that much more of an experience. This movie, when you watch it, is like, it's like witnessing a great event. Every scene in it has become, in one way or another, iconic. And when you're watching it, you think to yourself, this spawned one of the greatest horror franchises of all time. And it's not only a great film to watch, but it's a great film to think about. Because from the acting to the villain to how it was made, it's low-budget success. It's the underdog story horror movie that today we don't get that much of. A Nightmare on Elm Street is probably a 5 out of 5 star movie, and that's why it takes number 1 spot on the Nightmare on Elm Street ranking list. Now tell me what your favorite Nightmare on Elm Street movie is, and if you disagree or agree with my list. Like and subscribe.